Please welcome Governor Christie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about our country and our party enough for you to be here this weekend to put all of us through the paces. Look, what I want to do is just speak off the top about what's going on in the world right now. And then what I want to do is take questions from you rather than you hearing a speech from me. I want everybody to understand that from my perspective, what we see happening in Israel right now is connected to everything else that's going on in the world. It's connected to what we see going on in Ukraine. It's connected to what we see happening in the South China Sea with the Chinese and Taiwan. It's connected to the other things we see happening in the Middle East. We have four real bad actors in this world right now: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they are now working together to try to disrupt the world, to fill a vacuum that unfortunately has been left, in my opinion, by our country in world leadership, and to try to move the world towards a dictatorship, authoritarian type of rule. And what they look to do is to create fear. Because when fear is created, people worry about not having just a person in charge. And the fear that they're trying to create, they start to create in a place like Ukraine. And then the Iranians get their handmaidens, Hamas and Hezbollah, to do their dirty work. But please understand that Iran is behind what's happening in Israel right now. They're paying for it, they're encouraging it, they're arming them, and they're giving them what they need to be able to cause the level of death that we've seen. And I also think we need to be very, very conscious as a country that what we see in some parts of our own country and what we see around the world in reaction to this, the anti-Semitism that we see, is something that this country, in my opinion, needs to stand up against. Dr. King was right. You should not judge anyone by the color of their skin or their religion, but by the content of their character. And to have the type of things we've seen on college campuses in this country that have been just clearly anti-Semitic rhetoric. Every responsible person in this country who doesn't have prejudice in their heart, who sits by silently and says nothing to counter that, in my view, is complicit with it. The good people of this country need to stand up and say that that type of language, that type of conduct is unacceptable. And if you're Jewish in this country or around the world right now, you're living with the reality that this is the most Jewish people who have been killed in one moment since the Holocaust. So when you watch what Israel is now doing in Gaza, you need to remember that context. This is not theoretical to the Jewish people. Only 80 years ago, they lived through a time when an authoritarian government rounded them up from all over Europe and exterminated 6 million. And we then had to go and solve that problem, and we sacrificed 500,000 American lives in the process. We need to stop this stuff now before it gets to that stage. And that's why I've said these things are all connected. Because if you don't think the Russians are happy this morning that we are now distracted in Israel, you're kidding yourself. Every minute we spend in our news coverage and in our political discussion talking about Israel are moments that we're not talking about Ukraine. And that makes it really easy for the Russians to try to continue their aggression in Ukraine. And you have some candidates in this race who say that we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine and that, Putin is someone that they can go and talk to and convince that he should move away from China and come with us. This is a bipartisan problem. Every president since George W. Bush has made the same mistake. Bush thought he could talk to Putin. He was wrong. Obama thought he could talk to Putin. He was wrong. Trump thought he could talk to Putin. He was wrong. And Biden, in the beginning of his presidency, thought he could talk to Putin, and he was wrong. Vladimir Putin is a communist, authoritarian, dictator, former KGB agent. He's not our type of people. And we need to give him the same treatment that he tries to give to the rest of the world. We need to make sure he understands that if he attacks one of our friends, we will act to help them. And we will deter what he's trying to do. Because the last time we ignored a shooting war in Europe, hundreds of billions of dollars later, and 500,000 American lives, we pushed back Nazism. If you think that Vladimir Putin, if we give him Ukraine, is going to stop there, he said the worst day in his life was when the Soviet Union was taken down. He wants to put the old band back together, everybody. And Poland will be next. And if he goes into Poland, they're a NATO country. That means we're going too. Let's let the Ukrainians win this fight now so that we don't have to send American men and women to Poland or to one of the Baltic countries. And there should be no equivocation from anybody in this country, in my view, about where we stand with Israel. Fact is, they're the only democracy in the Middle East. If we don't stand with Israel, Israel will not exist. And that will cause tumult in this world that we don't even want to begin to think about. And so when we have some people in our own party who equivocate about Israel, some people in this race who equivocate about it, who criticize Prime Minister Netanyahu, who carry off old grudges in the context of the extermination that's going on over in the Middle East, that's not leadership. It's wrong. It's a sober time. There are dozens of other issues we could talk about, and I hope we do when I go to your questions. But I don't think that anybody who wants to be president of the United States in this week can talk about anything else when you come out here. Because in the end, this is what happens when America doesn't lead. When America takes a step back. When America fills in the moat and pulls up the drawbridge. It's not like no one else will lead, then the bad actors will. And all that does is make us spend more money to dig out of that hole and spend more American blood to dig out of that hole later. Let's not do that. And last, I'd just say, for any of you out there who have been watching all of this coverage, let's make sure we take some time over this weekend, after a week of this, to pray for the people over there and to pray for those hostages, both the Israelis and the Americans who are still being held captive, that they get returned to their families and their homes safe. Because every life is an individual gift from God. Every life is precious. And we have to fight to make sure we protect those lives. And if I'm president, you can count on the fact that we will. Without any doubt, without any equivocation, and not just with bluster, but with strong talk backed up by strong action. That's what the American people have always responded to, and that's what we got to get back to doing now. So, I'm going to stop there, and there's microphones out here, and you raise your hand. And by the way, the questions can be on anything, not just what I just talked about. I'll answer questions about that, but anything you want to talk about, I want to talk to you. So, yes, sir, right there. He's going to come up with a microphone behind you.
Chinese and maybe even Iranian money in our elections in the United States, including in New Hampshire?
Look, We saw this happen in 2016, where the Russians in particular were doing things in social media to try to influence our elections. And the fact is, what we need to do is to make sure that everybody in this country is following the law. Every person is following the law and letting law enforcement do the job that they need to do to catch the people who are trying to do those things. That's our first line of defense. If that first line of defense doesn't work, we're in trouble. And so we need to make sure that our law enforcement officers and our intelligence officers are empowered to intercept what's going on and to capture the people who are doing it. And so the candidates can help by making sure that they follow the law too and don't encourage that kind of stuff. Because winning at any cost is not what we should be doing. Winning within the law in this country and the system of justice that we have is the way we have to do it. All right, yes, right back there. He's coming with the microphone so people can hear you.
You said that silence in the face of evil is complicity. President Trump, for 4 months, attempted to overthrow an election. Are you okay with what Republicans, your fellow Republicans, are saying about that? And why don't? And so far, you have not. You've referred to there are people who.
Well,
everyone in this room knows who that person is.
Well,
It's Donald Trump. So go ahead and say
this
it.
This is the first time I have been accused in this race of not being tough enough on Donald Trump. So, like, if you live long enough, you'll see everything, right? Look, I think I've been very clear about the fact that what President Trump did in the aftermath of the 2020 election was beneath the office that he was privileged to hold, that we've now are nearly 3 years since then, and he hasn't presented a shred of evidence to prove that the election was stolen, and the reason he hasn't is because it wasn't. Yeah, of course it was. And I love everybody who says, of course it was, but then comes forward with no evidence to prove that it was. And here's the thing. If you're wondering where I stand, all you need to do is to have watched the first debate, when people were asked flat out, if he were a convicted felon, would you support him for President of the United States? And everybody but me and Asa Hutchinson raised their hands. Seems to me that if Adams and Jefferson and Franklin and Hamilton and Washington had known that someone would have the audacity to be under 91 counts of federal indictments and then possibly convicted and still offer themselves for the presidency, they would have added one clause to the Constitution about 35 years of age and a natural-born American citizen and not a convicted felon. We can't nominate nor elect a convicted felon to be president of the United States, and I've been pretty clear about all that. Yes, sir, in front.
Thank you, Governor. I'm John Mata. I'm a New Hampshire businessman. And the one thing that myself and most businesses in New Hampshire struggle with is finding enough people to employ. It's an ongoing problem. Matter of fact, statistics say that there are 10 million open jobs in the United States, and there are 6 million people unemployed. So the math is easy. So if every unemployed person in the United States got a job today, you still have 4 million jobs unfilled.
Yep.
If you were president, how would you combat that problem?
You have to fix the immigration system. Because what you have to do with the immigration system is a few things. First, you have to secure the southern border, because if you don't, then there's going to be no one who's incentivized to come here legally if they can come here illegally. If they have to wait to come here legally but doesn't have to wait to come here illegally, why the hell are they waiting? They want to get out of where they are and come here. So first you have to secure the southern border. On my first day as president, I would sign an executive order to send National Guard to the border to partner with our Customs and Border Patrol officers who are overwhelmed and understaffed. I would increase Customs and Border Patrol officers by 10,000. And you know that the average number of apprehensions in the last 11 months, a month, are 200,000 a month. You know how many beds we have to detain those people? 38,000. Like, look, I'm a lawyer. because I couldn't do math or science. But like even I can do that math, right? That's not going to work. So we need to double the beds of detention beds we have, and we need to triple the number of immigration judges we have. Because now if you capture somebody, it is 4 years before they get an asylum hearing. Well, if you let somebody out in this country for 4 years and expect they're coming back for a hearing 4 years later, I don't think that's going to happen most of the time when they run the risk of being taken out of the country. You need to do all those things, and then you need to set up a merit-based system for people to come here legally. You talked about the 4 million net open jobs. We need to look at where are those jobs geographically and what expertise do people need to do that job. And we have to go and say, these are the type of people with these type of skills who we want to come into the country. Because we're not gonna be able to grow this economy at 4 and 5%, which is what we're gonna need to do to try to grow and reduce our debt problem if we don't fill those jobs. And no president of the last 4 have been willing to step up and try to fix the immigration system along with talking tough on the border. And let's make something else clear, okay? We're not sending the United States Army over the border in Mexico to kill people. Like, it's not gonna happen. This is one of those things that gets said in a campaign that makes people feel good, but will never happen. The same way I stood in this state 8 years ago and heard that we were gonna build a big, beautiful wall across the entire border of Mexico and the United States, and the Mexicans were gonna pay for it. Well, 52 miles of new wall in 4 years of the Trump administration, and not the first peso from the Mexican government. So let's make sure people give you answers that can actually be done, and they have the experience to show they know how to get it done, rather than these wild things that people say that may make us feel good for a moment, but they're not gonna happen. And we saw that 8 years ago, and that's why we still have an immigration problem today. In fact, Joe Biden's made it even worse than it was before. And so we need now to make sure that we do practical things that will solve that problem and provide businessmen and women in this country the workforce they need to be able to grow their businesses and make them bigger and stronger and more profitable. I think I could take 2 more. In the back, young man. Hold on, get the microphone. You know the drill.
I do. So you just got booed for saying the 2020 election wasn't stolen. What does that tell you about your party? Thank you.
Well, it tells me that there's differences of opinion. And that's fine. We can have differences of opinion, and I'm going to argue my side of the argument. That's what this democracy was set up to do. So I don't hold any grudge against anybody who has a different opinion than me, even though they hold a grudge against me for having a different opinion. I'm fine with you having a different opinion about the 2020 election, but what I'd like to do is not argue about it emotionally, but arguing about it based on facts. Because everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own set of facts. And I will tell you this, I've known Donald Trump for 22 years. Believe you me, if he had the evidence to prove the election was stolen, we would have seen it years ago. And he hasn't presented it because he doesn't have it. Now, in the end, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. And our party is always going to have differences, and we should. We should argue with each other, but we should argue with each other towards a result, not just to keep arguing, because the country is stalled, and you watch it in Washington right now with our party in charge of the House. They can't even pick a speaker. Now, that makes us look like the gang that can't shoot straight, everybody. And it's going to make people wonder about whether they should continue to put us in charge. So we need to stop the petty arguing, and what we need to get to is a result. And that's what I did for 8 years in New Jersey with a Democratic legislature for every day of 8 years. All right, sir, I can take your last question right there. The microphone is making its way.
Thank you for being here, Governor.
My pleasure.
Fentanyl is a godsend if you're in extreme pain, but the components of fentanyl flooding over the southern border, who are the 350 people it's killing every day? It is the people who would join our military in 4 or 5 years. Make no mistake, China is preemptively killing our troops. The kinetic war with China has already started.
Totally agree with you. Look, and this is another one of the naive type of positions that are being put forward by, other folks in this race, whether it's Vivek or whether it's Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump. This proxy war with China has already begun in at least two ways. One, the war in Russia, which they are funding and supporting both with weapons and with money, and exactly what you just said. The precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from China, sent to the drug cartels in Mexico, and then sent into this country to kill our people. And until we confront China about that in a way that actually is effective and makes them understand there's a penalty to pay for committing an act of war on our country, then they won't stop. And all the talking in the world won't do it. We've had our last 3 presidents who have all they've done is talk about it and tell you how good they are at it, except the results show that every year the deaths are going up. 110,000 Americans dying of overdoses in the past year. It's the #1 killer for young men 18 to 34. And you feel it right here in New Hampshire, and you know it. And what we need to do is not only put those National Guard at the border to try to stop some of it and take actions against China to get them to stop sending it, but we also need to make treatment much more broadly available in this country. This is a disease, and we can help to treat that disease before it's fatal. But we have to stop pretending that it's a moral failing. It's not. It's a disease like heart disease or diabetes or cancer. People get addicted. And I'll end with this. I'm pro-life. And I believe that every life, as I said before, in the context of the Israeli conflict, is a precious gift from God. But if we're going to continue to be the pro-life party, we better be pro-life for the whole life, not just for the 9 months in the womb. And it's easier during the 9 months in the womb. Those of us who are parents know when they come out is when it gets complicated. That's when it gets hard. And the 16-year-old young girl on the floor of the county lockup somewhere in New Hampshire, her life is precious. The 50-year-old lawyer who's addicted to Percocet, who is ruining his life and the life of his family, his life is precious. The 70-year-old woman who is in chronic pain and gets addicted to painkillers and winds up committing suicide because of the depression that comes, her life was precious too. And every one of those people can be treated and made better. But we have to tell people it's okay to ask for help. We're not going to judge you. We're going to treat you. And we're going to help return you to being a good mother and father, a good son and daughter, a good brother and sister. The fabric of our country will be torn apart if we continue to lose 110,000 lives a year that way. So yes, get tougher on China. Yes, be stronger at the border. But that will only fix part of the problem. That's the part that's easy to say. The hard part to say is that we create the problem in this country too through our demands for this stuff. And we need to lower that demand by giving people a treatment that will allow them to survive and to turn their lives around. We need a president who, once again, will talk about our better angels, who will say we can do better and be better as a country, not talk about vindictiveness and anger and desperation. This country is still the shining light for the rest of the world. And yes, we have problems, but there's problems that can be fixed with strong leadership and honesty. Character matters, everybody. The truth matters whether you like it or not. And we need a president, once again, who will act with character and stand for truth. And we haven't had one for quite some time. I want to be that president for you. Thank you all for having me today. I appreciate it.